of its own foreign fighters who tried to flee their headquarters in the Syrian city of Raqqa.
We're here in the 17th Division military base just outside the city of Raqqa. And we're here with the soldiers of Bashar. You can see them now digging their own graves in the very place where they were stationed.
Can ISIS be defeated in this battle here?
That's the big question mark. And if ISIS can't be defeated, having taken this fight now back to ISIS, and if the Iraqi military is unsuccessful, then I think you have to look at a very different map in the Middle East.
Fighters say they often manage to defeat much larger armies, like the Iraqi military, because they're not afraid to die.
Al-Qaeda in Iraq 4 years ago was allowed to set up bases in the west of Iraq and invade eastern Syria. They started the civil war 4 years ago in Syria. They were given massive funding. They're 65%, according to NATO, of the rebel force. The Council on Foreign Relations last year had the headline, "Why We Need Al-Qaeda." And they said, give them air support to take over the country and we'll remove them later. Bull.
Since the capture and execution of Saddam Hussein, there's been death, chaos, tremendous instability in the region, and worst of all, the emergence of ISIS.
The people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
فما متاع الحياة الدنيا في الآخرة إلا قليل.
ISIS looks like it, in fact, can capture and hold territory, and that is their whole goal, to continue to expand throughout the region.
The White House armed, funded, militarily aided, and gave political office to the guy now leading ISIS terrorists in Libya.
I don't care about the report. I know these people intimately. We talk to them all the time.
Abdel Hakim Belhaj, seen here meeting with Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, was the emir of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, LIFG, an organization affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, which killed US troops in Iraq and Afghanistan.
You guys have the exclusive for, which is a product called Deep Cleanse. And why I'm so excited about it is it's a unique formula, almost like the iodine crystals. We have two unique products that nobody in the world has. One of the most amazing ingredients in the world, and it's called shilajit, and it's actually known as blood of the mountain or rock sweat because thousands of years ago, as a matter of fact, this ingredient was only given to the elite of the elite. Thousands of years ago up in the Himalayan mountains and in Tibet.
And we wanted to put this in stuff for a couple years, but we couldn't get an organic form.
Right. I mean,
so let's explain. I mean, this stuff's so good, we couldn't put it out for years.
Right. So I had to actually, it's kind of like the iodine crystals, finding a source deep in the earth that we could get the cleanest source available. But in Tibet and in Nepal and in the Himalayan mountains, thousands of years ago, they watched these monkeys. And during the summer months, the monkeys would go up into the mountains.
Now you're being racist against monkeys.
And they would pick this black substance from the mountains. And so in Russia, they actually, it grows in Russia in the mountains and in the Himalayas and only in the summer. And shilajit is actually the decomposition of up to 7,000 different medicinal herbs. So it decomposes, all these different herbs decompose in the Himalayan mountains and the volcanic soil up there. And what happens in the summertime...
So it's almost like an oil from...
Yes, it's high in fulvic acid, it's high in humic acid.
Because they're always claiming oil is really from decomposed animals and plants. There is some oil that is based from fossils, but most of it's really abiotic. But so this is a true fossil source? I mean, explain it to me.
It is, it's really the decomposition, like I said, of over 7,000 different medicinal herbs and plants. And with the rocks and the pressure deep in the mountains, it freezes and during the summertime and the pressures build it up.
It oozes out.
It oozes out. So it literally oozes out of the mountain.
It's like rock sap.
It's like rock sap. It's black, and it's highly nutritious. Even in the 1980s, when the Olympic athletes in Russia were accused of being on steroids, they found out that they were actually been given shilajit because it works as an anabolic as well. and it builds muscles. It's a big dose in there. The second big main ingredient in there is a volcanic zeolite concentrate. And what this formula is designed to do, the shilajit and the zeolites have a real strong negative charge. All the metals and chemicals and PCBs and VOCs have positive charges. So these go in, they grab it, and then they safely eliminate it through the body so you can become healthy. I mean, this is an amazing formula. I wish I actually had it, but because this was an exclusive INFOWARS Life product, you're the only one in the world that has this formula now. And you know, there is going to be a limited supply available when you sell out because you can only harvest this once a year.
How do people take it? How is it recommended that this be done? Just a daily dose?
Yeah, daily dose. The instructions are on the label. You know, of course, I kind of modify it for each individual. It depends on what your lifestyle is. I mean, honestly, the best thing to do is for you to avoid all these chemicals and toxins in your environment and try to identify them and start slowly reducing them. But personally, I'm going to probably take it every day, every other day, and I'll probably go with about a dropper full to maybe 2 dropper fulls. And I don't expose myself to any chemicals.
InfoWarsLife.com. Please also support our local AM and FM affiliates, support their local sponsors or become a sponsor, and spread the word. Because these aren't just great products. This is how we fund this independent operation. We're not taxpayer funded like MSNBC or NPR, and neither is your local station. So support them, folks. This is a war.
The shadow government and their globalist eugenics agenda is easy to see today for anyone who bothers to take a look. But that wasn't always the case back in the 1960s. The assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy is a rare case in the 60s, one where the globalists carried out their operation in plain sight, on display for the world to see. This year, which marks the 52nd anniversary of the assassination of the president, well, we dug up a never-before-seen clip of best-selling author and historian Jim Marrs as he breaks down Kennedy's awareness of the growing globalist threat and how they were behind his ultimate demise.
It's clear to everyone today that America has lost its way. The problem is they don't know where to point the finger. Liberals blame conservatives, conservatives blame liberals, Democrats versus Republicans, and it's all a shadow show, folks, because the global fascists control both sides. They play both ends against the middle. Of all the U.S. presidents, probably one of the best educated and the one that was in the best position to understand this National Socialist or Nazi infiltration of the United States was President John F. Kennedy. He cut his teeth by writing a book called Why England Slept, which pulled apart the circumstances of the appeasement of Hitler and the Nazis and how that led to World War II. So he was certainly understood all this. And in his brief time as president, he began to take steps that was curtailing the power of this growing national security state as well as the corporate power. The Kennedy Tax Act of 1962, closing tax loopholes for the multinational corporations. He was going to, by many statements, he was going to withdraw us from the Vietnam War. And in 1963, he even began to try to curtail the power of the Federal Reserve System and even issued $6 billion in currency, non-interest bearing currency, through the Treasury Department rather than through the Federal Reserve System that we must pay interest on. And this, of course, is what led to his assassination. And this explains why that the military chiefs at that time, the mafia chieftains at that time, the FBI, CIA leaders at that time, Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, they're all dead and gone. And yet the power still exists to cover up the high-level coup d'etat that took place in this country in 1963. The plan to take over America involved several things. First, they had to get control of the U.S. economy. This was accomplished in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act, when bankers gained control over our money supply, the very thing that Thomas Jefferson had warned us against back at the time of the American Revolution. And then after World War II and with the contingencies of wartime, they began to create what is now called the national security state. They did this by bringing in an influx of unreconstructed Nazis and rolling them into our space program and into our military-industrial complex, into our mind control, scientific establishment, which spread into the universities. And the problem here is that when we accepted this Nazi technology, we also got their ideology. And then by the time that Bush became president, and by the time that Cheney and Rumsfeld were ascending to power, they transformed and consolidated this national security state until we see today where the checks and balances are being eroded, they're being done away with, and we're being led into a fascist type system. Fascism being defined as the combining of state, government, and corporate power. With Kennedy's death, the national security state surged ahead, the shadow government began to consolidate their power, and Lyndon Johnson, who was up for grabs, and could be bought by most anybody, plus he had heard the guns go off in Dealey Plaza. He knew who his masters were, and he was guided by his council of wise men, all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And then, of course, after Johnson, we got Richard Nixon, who was put into power in the government and into political office by Nazi money. And then Nixon appoints George Herbert Walker Bush, the son of the Nazi financier Prescott Bush, who was prosecuted in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemies Act for handling money for the Nazis, who sat on the board of the America-Hamburg steamship line, and which was the major conduit for Nazi spies, saboteurs, and propaganda into the United States. And that's when they begin to consolidate their power, and that's when they begin to push for neoconservatism, another name for National Socialism. In 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States were presented with a plan called Operation Northwood. This was a plan to plant bombs in American cities, target American citizens for assassination, hijack ships and planes, and blame it all on Castro. This plan was actually submitted to and signed off on by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was President Kennedy who put a stop to it and said, no, we don't operate this way. We're not going to do this. He fired Admiral Lemser, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs, and he ordered all the copies of Northwoods destroyed. But typical government, one copy survived in a government file somewhere, and ironically enough, it was in the early 90s, thanks to the Assassination Records Review Board that was created by Congress in the wake of the Oliver Stone film, JFK, and the outcry from the public to know what really happened to Kennedy. And they were given the authority to go into government files and look for anything pertaining to Kennedy's assassination or government policy at that time, and they found the Northwoods documents. So again, we see the curtain lifted slightly, and we get to see the plans of this national security state, these national socialists that have taken control in the United States. Everyone who has either lived through it or has studied American history since the 1950s agrees that November the 22nd, 1963, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy marked a turning point in the history of the United States, and the turn was downward. We have lost prestige, we have lost everything in decline since that event. And what we see then is that this is the benchmark for the ascendancy of what has come to be known as the shadow government. This is when they pull off the gloves, and this has made an overt move to create a coup d'etat in the United States, and felt like that they had enough power to pull it off. And by the time they had consolidated this power in the Reagan years, it has only become grown stronger and stronger until today. People have finally, it is so overt and so in your face that people have finally begun to understand that this is moves to destroy the Democratic Republic of the United States. So today we find ourselves in a situation of where it doesn't matter whether you vote conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, you're still going to get the globalist, fascist, the National Socialist, the Nazis. And it's incumbent upon us today, because